As you can see on screen, there is a presentation there from the Ghent Workgroup. I am also involved in the Ghent Workgroup, but I am not going to speak about this today. Instead, as you can see on the slide, we have Stephan Jaeggi with us, who is going to present, I don't know how long, Stephan, but it's up to you.
I don't know either.
We will find out who is going to present this topic. And the topic here is the Ghent PDF Output Suite. And I'm not going to say anything about it because otherwise I'm just going to repeat what Stephan is already going to do. And that's no fun for either of us. So Stephan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just quickly turn off my video because that takes away bandwidth, and I have such a nice picture where you can look at. And you're supposed to look at my presentation anyway. So today the topic is the Ghent PDF Output Suite, which is the thing I'm responsible at the Ghent Workgroup as the main co-chair of the Process Control Subcommittee. I will tell you what the Ghent Output Suite is, and also about some recent development we have done. Here's some information about myself. I'm coming out of graphic arts. I studied print and packaging engineer a long time ago. And since 1991, I'm involved in PostScript. So even before in PDF, earlier in PostScript, even before it came out, I was already involved in that. And since 1998, since the very first meeting, I'm a technical expert at the ISO committee, which defines PDFX. And I'm also active at the PDFX Ready in Switzerland, where I'm the certification officer. And I'm co-chair at the Ghent Workgroup Process Control Subcommittee since 2005. I used to be technical officer for quite a while at the Ghent Workgroup, and I'm also the editor of a blog in German and English called pdfaktuell.ch. So the agenda for today, I would talk a little bit about the goal of the output suite and about how to process it, how to evaluate the results. And then I will talk about the new initiative we have come out at the Ghent Workgroup recently, which is the Conformance Certification for the Ghent PDF Output Suite. And we already have first results of that, so I will share that at the end of the presentation. First of all, the goal and the target audience for the Ghent PDF Output Suites. We started the Output Suites in the early 2000s. We are at version 5 now. The goal was always to test output workflows, not just the RIP, but the entire output workflow, including column management and imposition and trapping and everything regarding PDFX compliancy. And in version 4 and 5 of the output suite, it was PDFX 4 compliancy that we were testing. It's important to know that the output suite is not limited to the GWG specification we have for digital prepress files, because there are certain limitations which we don't respect, because in order to visualize compliancy problems, we need to use very special object properties which are outside of the Ghent specification. So don't even think of doing a GWG pre-flight with the files of the output suite. That will miserably fail, because we use a lot of very hard to the edge definitions in PDF to be able to make it very easy to detect errors. I will show you some of these settings right after that. The target audience is twofold. We first target developer of RIPs and output systems, proofing systems, etc. They can use our test files to verify if their handling of PDF is in conformance with the ISO specifications. And there we especially we look at layout application and viewers. We often find problems that they don't respect, for instance, overprinting or handling of transparency, etc. But we also target end users who want to test if their output workflows are their settings is correctly, and if they want to adjust the settings. So without understanding or having to understand what's really in these test objects, they can easily see if their settings is correct or not. That's the goal. The output suite is free to download. You can go to the website of the Ghent Workgroup, and there you find a, oops, I had already opened that. You find a page where the output suite is described, and there you have a download feature where you can download this current version 5. The delivery you will get is first of all 51 test patches. So there's single patches covering one topic of the PDF specification, and there are 3 categories, so 3 groups of these patches. One is CMYK only. A second group has 8 patches with spot colors. So if you don't deal with spot colors or print spot colors, you can leave that category away. And then there is recently added in version 5 a third group which uses ICC-based colors, and their color management is involved. So these are more demanding patches and tests than the other ones. And we have grouped these patches, these 51, or not all, but 48 of them, into 6 amalgamated test pages. There's a reference file and documentation. I will show you these amalgamated test pages. 3 of them are cover the CMYK patches. So I will briefly open this test file. So in total, it's 6 pages. And we have page 1, CMYK test files, where we have some shading objects. We have overprint tests. We have device N tests with CMYK only. There's also a device N test with spot colors. Then on page 2, we have transparency tests, different transparency modes, all in CMYK, and soft mask tests. Then on page 3, there are miscellaneous tests like font-related tests, if different font types are supported, or font subsets, or font substitution. And then we have here a 16-bit test, and JPEG 2000 and JPEG 2 compression tests, which were new also in PDFX4. And on page 4, we have the spot color related tests, where we also have spot color device N based tests. They sometimes look similar, but one uses spot color, the other doesn't. And here we have the first page, which has ICC based tests. We have overprint of ICC based color. We have ICC based transparency objects, and we have ICC based JPEG 2000. And then we have some 16-bit image tests, and also some they're not really tests of the ISO specification, but here we can detect if the file has been color converted or if the output intent has changed. That's more for analysis if there are errors in the other patches, and we see here a cross appear, then we see that some manipulation has taken place, which might be probably not so good, not so healthy to the other patches. So that's basically the 6 pages, and usually most of the people use these 6 pages to test. They don't use the single patches. That's mainly for developers if they concentrate on one single aspect, so they use the single patches. We have a reference file which has all the 6 pages imposed, and there we have also color conversions, color separation, sorry, where you can see the different color separations. Here we have a spot color, second spot color. All the texts on these patches, they appear in all separations because they're defined with register color. So regardless of which separation you look at, you can always read what the legends of the description in these patches. So that's a help to analyze your results. And then we have quite a comprehensive documentation. There's a general documentation which describes the whole suite, and then for each patch or group of patches there is a separate README. I collected them in the latest release to one single file, so in total it's 70 pages where you get the information. Let's go to one of the patches. Let me see here, for instance, the overprint mode. So you see a description of the patches, how it should be used, and then you see how it should look when everything is okay, and what can happen when it goes wrong, and also some explanations. What may be the reason. So they were written by the original authors of the patch, and sometimes they're a little bit more elaborated, sometimes they're rather short. But that's for each thing. So if you encounter a problem, you should go here to the documentation and read the 2 or 3 pages about this particular patch where you get an error. So how can you see if you get an error? The main goal when we started this whole project, I think it was in the early 2000s, 2005 or 6, I can't remember. We said it must be very, very easy to detect a misbehavior. So you should not need to have a loop and evaluate these pages or patches for hours. You should be able to evaluate this with a viewing distance of half a meter. I would even say 1 meter is enough to see if there is a problem or not. How did we do this? With different methods. There is, first of all, we need in some patches we use check marks. So if you see a check mark like here in this device N thing, then everything is okay. If you see a cross, then there is a misbehavior. I will try to explain that to you in this example. So what we have here is a device N, sorry, image, a duotone image, which is composed by black, so CMYK black, and GWG green. That's the spot color we have defined ourselves. And you also see this check mark. I make use of pit stop to move away a little bit this image. Move away, I have said. Something with voice commands does not always work very good. Here, you see, there's the image, and underneath the image, there's a green check mark and a green cross. And the green check mark is defined, if I can catch it. Pit stop is slow. Maybe I should pay and focus some money. Here.
I cannot possibly comment.
Here we have it. We have the check mark, which is defined with cyan and yellow. So it's a CMYK check mark and a little bit of black. Don't ask me why 50% of black. I could not justify this anymore today, but that's the case when in 2013 I defined this patch. And the image itself is black and GWG green. So it has no cyan and no yellow. That means, and this image is overprinting. That means it overprints the CMYK check mark. And since there is no cyan and no yellow in the image, the cyan and the yellow from the check marks is visible through the image. And then there is a cross here in green, in GWG green. That means since GWG green is also part of the device N image, you don't see the GWG green cross. But if that changes, and that's what happens when when there's an error, when device N is not supported by an output workflow, then this is converted to CMYK. So let's do that here. And when you convert that device N with GWG green to CMYK, it cannot, the GWG green of the GWG green of the cross is visible because there's no GWG green in the image anymore, and the CMYK yellow and cyan of the check mark is no longer visible because there's CMYK in the image now. I hope this was understandable. I can tell you this is one of the easiest explanation of the behavior of these objects. They're much more sophisticated things we have built up there. And even this was not easy to find. It took us quite some time to get to the right idea. Since we are among us, I can reveal the secret of all these things, because at our meetings, we often meet in Ghent, and then in the evening we go out for dinner together, and most of the time that ends up in a beer bar, where some of us, not everybody, but some of us still continue discussing these questions. And once in a beer bar late at night, after the third quack beer, somebody had the idea of this checks, marks and crosses. And of course, I went back to the hotel, not to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. I sat on the computer and tried it out. And I think at 2:30 in the morning, I had it. And that's how these test patches are made. So thanks to Belgian beer, lots of Belgian beer, this was possible. Okay, so this was a little bit more in detail. Don't be afraid, I will not do that for all 51 pages. There's other things where cross marks are used. It's in the blending tests, where we have combination of crosses and the background area, where when the transparency blend mode works well, the blending of the cross and the underlying color gives exactly what the background also contains, the same color, so you don't see a cross. As soon as the blend mode doesn't work, a cross appears. In some situations, only 2 or 3 of the blend modes are not supported. And then you see that 14 blend modes are okay and 2 blend modes are wrong. one thing which we found out, sometimes there are faint X's visible in these patches. So I don't know if you can see that over the video presentation, but you would be able to see it in the handout. There's a faint X, which is a little bit lighter than the background. And this is due to different color management modules and settings, but that's not an error. An error is a clearly visible cross mark, and this is an error. The other one can be ignored. So that's the reason behind that. Sometimes we cannot work with crosses and check marks. We use reference images, like for this font support patch. On top, the top line is the actual font, and the second line is a picture of the expected result. And here you see very good. The first font is well supported, the second not. So you see a deviation between the reference image and that, and here it's very obvious that something went very badly. Same here for type 3 vector. This is not a constructed example; it's a real world example from a layout application, not supporting all the font types in PDF. That's long times ago. It has been fixed thanks to this patch. So I know that this patch has been used extensively by the developers of this application to fix their code. And so I think we helped a lot of developers to make their applications PDFX compliant. Here's another example for soft masks. This is the actual test objects, and that's a reference image, how it should look like. So you see here something went wrong with these soft masks, and so it's not rendered properly. Another very clever way to use cross marks is here. We have a 16-bit image, and when the 16-bit image is not processed correctly, several things can happen. It could be that it disappears completely. Then it's easy to, and that was the first attempt we had. We had a red cross behind this image. So if the image disappears, you see the red cross. But it could also be that the image has other artifacts, like a deviation of color or lines in the image. And one of my colleagues had a very clever idea. He created a cross in 8-bit of the same image and placed it on top of the 16-bit image. So if the 16-bit image is somehow damaged, has artifacts, you still see the 8-bit cross, and then you see that there are lines, or the 16-bit image turns negative or something, then you see that something is wrong, because you still see this 8-bit cross. And that was a clever idea. You see here other artifacts in the JPEG compression thing. So these lines which appear here. So there's different artifacts which can happen for the same patch. These are screenshots of different viewers on the Windows, which did at the time not support JPEG 2000. Another thing we have done is to test font substitution. We have embedded a special version of the symbol font, which only contains this check mark. Every character which is encoded has this check mark vectors. And as long as this check mark is visible, the embedded font has been used, and when the output workflow substitutes the embedded fonts with the fonts installed on the output system, which they did for a long time, then the original characters at this encoding in the original symbol font appears. which is usually, it depends a little bit on the operating system, but it's certainly not that check mark, because this check mark only exists in that one manipulated font, which only exists on my hard disk and nowhere else. And even these check marks I have stolen from another font and manipulated the vectors so that nobody can tell me or can accuse me that I have stolen a font character. But that's also a clever thing, and I think there was another 2 or 3 Quark beers involved in that. We have added labels when we did newer versions, when we also added PDFX4 related patches. We have added a PDFX4 label, and later when we also added color management patches, we have added this X4 ICC label, so you can immediately see if this patch requires X4 or requires even ICC based colors. There's no labels for all the patches, so they are usually X1A or X3 based. So of course, this PDFX file is PDFX4 conform. We test it with pre-flight application. We have tested these files with these 3 pre-flight tools. And we also have added a pre-flight audit trail. That's, by the way, a Ghent Workgroup specification, which we don't know when we published that a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, which embeds the result of a pre-flight inside the file. And you can see that by when you open this these patches. I don't know here. So you see here, if you go to the standards panel in Acrobat, you see the audit trail and that it was successful and the file has not been modified. There is also a digital signature added by this process, and as long as the digital signature is okay and valid, you know that nobody has changed the file. If the signature gets invalid, or if it says here modified truths, then you cannot trust this audit trail anymore. So people could have changed something and make the PDF file no longer PDFX compliant, and in this case you should download it again and try with a fresh file, because you never know what has been changed. So how should this output suite test files be processed, either as single patches or in combination of patches? We already did the work for you. It's not that easy. It's some people just think they place these patches in InDesign and then do the test. That's a bad idea, because InDesign is not PDFX, fully PDFX compliant. So mainly some overprinting definitions are not supported by InDesign. That means you already get problems when you import the files in InDesign, and then you have the same problems when you export them to PDF again. So combining such patches on these test pages is a little bit more complicated thing, and you have to be very, very careful. You should process these patches and the test files like regular PDFX4 jobs you get from your customers. You can impose it, or you should impose it when you go to offset printing. You could print it as single and double page in digital printing, or if you in an ad workflow, you could place it like supplied ads in your layout, and then see if these properties survive. And in the end result, when you export to PDFX6, if you see any crosses or changes to the reference images, etc. If you encounter problems, you should first of all in your output system use a setting for PDFX files, if that is provided by your vendor. A lot of vendors still by default use older settings files, which were created maybe for PDFX1A, maybe not even for PDFX files, and then they do a lot of some fixes, so they change overprint settings and such things, and that means that's not PDFX compliant. The ISO specifications clearly states that the overprint settings defined in the PDF file must be honored. So every setting in your workflow which changes the overprint behavior, forcing white to knockout or black to overprint, is against the ISO specification, and you will see that because we can detect that by displaying then across. So do also, for color management, do not delete ICC profiles in the PDF. Use the embedded ICC profiles. Do not convert spot colors to CMYK, and use the output intent of the PDFX file to, if you have to render, for instance, the ICC-based patches or RGB-based patches have to be rendered to the output intent, and deactivate the use of system fonts or font caging if you encounter font substitution problems, for instance. So that's the general advice we can give. And there, in most of the readmes of the single patches, you will find more details and more hints what can go, what could be the reason that something goes wrong. We have encouraged our vendor members at the Ghent Workgroup to publish instructions on how to successfully output the Ghent Output Suite. And later on, one of our colleagues had the brilliant idea to give a compliancy label to these vendors who have created these instructions, of course, after a in-depth validation by ourselves. And we have now 12 vendor members which have created such instructions. Sometimes there are multiple instructions. Some vendors don't require any instructions because out of the box the system behaves well, or there are no settings possible, like in these viewer applications. This is remote proof stuff from these two companies, and you find this on the website. There is a page which says Compliance in the Instructions, and you find all these instruction sheets in the here on these websites. They're enhanced, of course, as soon we have newer ones or newer versions, and there's already room for additional ones. So that's also a good information possibility. If you use one of these systems and you encounter problems when you output the output suite, then most of the time you will find here an information what settings are recommended to successfully output the Ghent Output Suite. And you will most of the time also find contact information. So if these instructions do not help, then you can contact the vendor directly, or give your local vendor representative the information, because these information come from the headquarters usually. And if you recognize that these instructions are not good, they're wrong, please also inform us at the Ghent Workgroup. Then we go after these people and maybe even take away their compliancy label if they're not able to fix their instructions. It hasn't happened yet, but I could imagine that maybe in some cases it will be necessary. One new development makes this thing maybe a little bit faster, that we know more about the real behavior of these systems, because we have started recently a Conformance Certification for end users. And since the Ghent Workgroup cannot manage that globally directly with all the end users, we decided to involve our members, the Ghent Workgroup members. They can offer these conformance certifications to their members, if it's a user association, for instance, or to their customers, if it's a vendor or community or whatever. They can also offer it to the general public if they want to deal with a lot of people. So it's up to them how they will offer that in their area. The Ghent admin and prepared by the Process Control Subcommittee, we have created the test files. It's basically the ones I have already showed you. We have created guidelines, detailed guidelines for the members, for the service providers. We have a validation process, we have labels, certificates, etc. that we provide from the Ghent Workgroup. And we also have created a personalization feature. So for running these tests and getting a conformance certification, we want to avoid abuse, that somebody sends in the results from another company or from another systems. So we have a personalization feature, and that looks like this. So the general output suite files, which you can download, they have a remark here on top that personalization test files are required for the conformance certification. And then if you ask for these files at one of the participating Ghent members, then you will get a personalized test file without the green. That's just annotation thing from Acrobat I've added. So you get here a personalized test file, which in this case is for my company. And with this test files, you can submit the results. And here it's also said that it's a test file by PDF ID Switzerland. There's additional information on the bottom of the page. There's a website of the association and a email address if somebody has questions. So that's the file the print provider gets, and the goal is that a print service provider can prove that their PDF output workflow is compliant with the PDFX4 standard. And the whole procedure works like this. If a service provider, we call them candidate in this procedure, they request the certification at the participating member. I will show you a list of the participating member in a minute. The member creates personalized test file, sends it to the candidate processes the file, they get detailed instructions on how to do that. And then the GWG member checks the result. If he thinks it's not good, he sends it back to the candidate. They can send in another result. If the member thinks the result is good, sends it to the GWG admin. She validates the results. If she is in doubt, she contacts the chairs of the Process Control Subcommittee. If everything is okay, then a certification label and a certificate is created, sent back to the member, sends it to the candidate. They can use it on their website or whatever they want to. And we also publish the name of the company and the systems used on gwg.org. I will show you the page in a minute. And so the whole world can see who is compliant to this output suite, and of course is compliant to PDFX4 by the same thing. So the candidates, they output this personalized output suite test files, and they send us back pictures of the printed pages. So the pages must be printed. You cannot send screenshots from from an output system, or you could send in a screenshot from reader. The reader displays this patch, these test files perfectly, but nobody sells reader screenshots. So a print service provider sells prints. So that's why we want to see the end result. And we have stayed away that they have to send in the printed results, which, by the way, we do in Switzerland. We do similar certification with the same patches since more than 15 years. And we ask for printed results. So they have to send in 10 printed copies in case of an offset certification. And but if you do that from the entire world, that becomes a little bit complicated. So we decided to go with pictures. The candidate gets a guideline document where it is described how to process the files, how to evaluate the results, etc. And we hope that is clear enough that everybody can handle this. These files are sometimes translated by the member who is managing the certification. So they can localize it. If they want to translate it in French or Spanish or whatever, they can do so. The main document is the English one. We have grouped the certification into 2 levels, because the pages 5 and 6 with the ICC-based call, they're quite demanding, and most of the print service providers, they still stick to CMYK and spot color workflows, and the settings also of most of the output systems are not by default done for ICC-based colors, and so most of the people fail. And maybe with the help of the instructions published on the Ghent website, they can use the right settings, but some of the things is quite heavy. That's why we decided to make two levels. You can get level 1 compliancy, which is only the first 4 pages, CMYK and spot colors, and you can also get level 1 and 2 compliancy. Then you must also output page 5 and 6 without any problems, of course. Then you get labels for your website or your company letters or whatever. So also in level 1 and level 2. These labels have a validation date, so they're valid for 2 years, and then the certification must be renewed. It's the same process, and then they get new labels and also new certificates. This is also valid for 2 years, so it looks like this. And we have this website where we list all the companies which have already passed the certification. I could quickly go to the current state of the website, because there has been a change yesterday, I think. So here's again the description of all things, and here we have a link to this website where we list all the certificates. We have started this whole project with a pilot test in Latin America, where one of our new members, they had a PDF training program for their members, and they included the certification for their participants, and apparently contact to the Ghent website does not work. Anyway, I have here screenshots, luckily. You see here, this is these Latin America companies. And recently, as I said yesterday or the day before, the first regular certificate has been passed, And it was a company from France, which now on the website appears on top of this list. Oops. So that's the validation. Again, you see here we have a web page describing this whole process. Here's a list of the participating members. They at least indicated interests. Not all have started the certification program yet, but you're free to bother them, and they have to retire officially before they get off this list. And there is one, as said, one certification has been done this week, and it was done or managed by 4Ps, which I think is a company you already know. And they have even started a certification course for the Ghent PDF Output Suite. And I think David will tell you a couple of words about that. And I have one final slide. I hate it. I don't want to answer. So these Ghent Output Suite test files, that's very, very important to remember. They are regular PDFX files. They do not contain any objects which cannot be part of another PDFX file in daily production. The definitions used in there are maybe extreme in order to visualize errors, but the features used there are all official features of PDFX 4 defined by the ISO. If you it may be possible, if you're doing this output test, that you have to adjust your settings of your output workflow. If you found the right settings, please don't throw them away after outputting these test files. You should use them for all of your PDFX files, X4 files especially. But you also need different settings for non-PDFX files, because they need some fixing. They need that white is to be knocked out and black to be overprint and other things. In PDFX X files, these settings have to come from the creation application. And then they can be seen in your viewer, in Reader, in Acrobat, in other viewers. If they are PDFX compliant, they can be seen in your proof. They can be seen in your output workflow systems and end up on your plates. If only at the end of the whole workflow, in the output workflow or even the RIP, you change these settings, you get different results from what your Acrobat reader of your customer is displaying, or your proof systems will print on a proof print. And then you get different results than the end results on your prints. And then it's very difficult to explain that to your customer. So please use PDFX compliant settings for outputting PDFX files, and use other settings with fixes and whatever for non-PDFX files. So that's my final advice. So thank you for your attention. And now the answer is clear. It took me 50 minutes to do this presentation, which was less than I expected. If you have additional questions, you can send me an email, and then I will try to answer you. So now I stop sharing here. Huh?
Thank you very much, Stephan. As you said, I want to add two sentences maybe about how we're handling that at 4Ps. I have to be careful which hat I'm wearing, because I'm also executive director of the Ghent Workgroup, and I'm co-chair of some stuff and so on. So, but I'm speaking for 4Ps now. We're very interested in this because what what we see when we go to customers is that it is often very difficult for them to know what the right thing to do is. And it's even more difficult because when they buy stuff, whether it's hardware or software, it's not always installed correctly by the people who do these things, who install these things. And so again, this output suite is a very, very easy tool to figure out where there are problems and what those problems might be, and then to fix them. So that's why we like them. What we also figured out, and I think this is something that came out of the other compliancy, the work that these initial members have done in certifying customers, is that it is just going to someone and giving them the certification tests can work if they do everything correct already. But the whole point of the certification test is to also help people who are not doing things correctly already to get to the point where they do. And so what we have done is we've combined the certification process that we offer together with training on the basic stuff, understanding the concepts in PDF that perhaps people don't understand yet, understanding how to check for things that perhaps are not correct. And then once you build some basic understanding around things, then looking at, okay, can we now do this certification? What are the problems that come out? And together with them, look if there are any problems, together with them trying to figure out what the problems are and how to fix them. And I think that is a common thread that we see in people who are interested in the certification process and in guiding people through the certification process, is that it's always going to be an educational process as well. The purpose is to teach people how to get better output and repeatable output. And so that's what we're trying to do from our side. And hopefully there will be many more people who actually use this to get proper output. There is one thing that I want to add also to the process itself. As Stephan said, once you've found settings that work, don't go changing them back because of whatever reason. Yeah. There is one thing that you might encounter. As Stephan mentioned in one of the earlier slides, a lot of the RIPs, for example, have settings to correct things on the fly, correct overprint settings and so on. And you might think that you need them, that you need to do them, and that is fine. For the certification to succeed, you will have to switch them off. And actually, my personal feeling would be that if you want to do corrections like that, you should do them ahead of time and not at the RIP, but you should make sure that the files that are sent to the RIP are already correct, because then at least you can proof them correctly and share them with customers correctly and so on. But if you rely on that in your process, yeah, then you might have to switch it on again in the RIP after you've made sure that everything works correctly. The whole idea of the certification test is that you run them and you can verify whether software or hardware deals with these files in the proper way. And that means that you need to have good files to begin with, or well, God knows what's going to happen. So you have to also not just blindly do this. I think you also need to try and understand what the process is and what you have in place at the moment, and whether this can actually work or not. If you're getting files in well, if you're pushing these patches through a very complex workflow that does all kinds of things and does a bunch of corrections and stuff like that, then more than likely you're going to see problems somewhere. And those might be real problems, or they might just be the way your process is set up and unavoidable. But you have to try and figure that out. Okay. If there are any questions, I don't see any questions, so it feels like this was I think you made it so clear that there are no questions, Stephan, or people are scared of asking them now because it's too complex. That's always a possibility. If someone has any questions, you can still ask them. As we said in the beginning, you'll get the presentation. You will also have the video, so you can go back and watch again. And by all means, visit the Ghent Workgroup website and download the test suite. I think it's one of the most downloaded things we have on the Ghent Workgroup site. So download it, read the documentation, experiment with these things. If you want to see them fail, I think that is still, it's a long time since I've done that, but I guess it's still the case. If you open them in preview on Mac, for example, more than likely you will see some problems still. So it shouldn't be so difficult to see what happens when things fail. I think if you open them in Acrobat, actually you get pretty good results by now. I don't know if there is anything that still fails in Acrobat.
No, since quite some time, Acrobat and even the reader really visualizes these test files correctly. We were fighting for a long time at the Ghent Workgroup and trying to convince Adobe that they make the reader also PDFX compliant, so they honor overseen printings and output intents for display. And I think with Acrobat 9 reader, they finally achieved that goal.
Yeah. So you will have to use preview.
The reference file, for instance, the reference file I showed you contained screenshots from Acrobat when everything was correct.
Okay. No more questions. Thank you very much, Stephan. I think then it's exactly 1 hour, so that is absolutely spot on. If someone can think of questions afterwards, I think Stephan had his contact details on at some point. So that those are in the slides that you will get as well. Feel free to reach out to him or to us and ask any questions, and we will be happy to forward. If you have questions that are again to a group specific as well, same thing, but there is also contact possibilities on the Ghent Workgroup website. There's lots more stuff that is interesting on the Ghent Workgroup website, so browse around and see what else you can use from there. Cool. Then next Café is next week, and that will talk about imposition, quite imposing to be specific. So I'm sure we'll see many of you then, and all that is left for me is to wish you a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.